Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined as always by Brian Christopherson, Michael Bruntz. Gentlemen, Nebraska has a new look defensive line room. How do we feel about it? Give me the first thought that comes to your mind as you think about Nebraska of Ochaun, Mathis, and Devin Drew, Michael Bruntz.
It's a different looking picture than it was this time last week. I mean, we were a little bit skeptical that Nebraska was going to get Mathis, and now you have one of the more coveted pass rushers in the portal, and now you have a guy that's played a ton of snaps at Texas Tech. So it's still a concern, but it's maybe dropping down the concern list a little bit. Just a little.
Okay. All right. Well, are we going to get some insight on this concern list?
I'll let you guys, we'll do a lap and then I'll come back.
Okay. All right. BC, new look defensive line. What does it mean to you?
It definitely tilts the mood. It sort of shifts the conversation, I think, toward the possibilities now of how you can arrange things with Ochaun Mathis and who you can get on the field at certain times and all that stuff. And Devin Drew, of course, will add even more flexibility to that. Devin Drew, of course, talked to him the other day. He's not going to actually be here until July, so he'll have to be a very quick study. But he has been before. He was that when he started at Iowa Western, really went from a seventh teamer to a starter in a few weeks, and obviously had some success at Texas Tech. And with Devin Drew, I know there's a thought from him and his former coach, Scott Strohmeyer at Iowa Western, that this scheme's going to fit him better, that Nebraska is going to be more of a four-man down lineman, and that he'll fit well within the interior there, as opposed to the three-man front Texas Tech was running, where maybe he was a little out of position and trying to make the best of it. So maybe his skill set is going to be more accentuated. But there's no doubt. I mean, if Nebraska didn't get Ochaun Mathis on Saturday, even though that was a really tough recruiting fight, you know what the reaction would have been. There would have been a lot of doom and gloom and, oh, they can't ever quite get a win and anything. And so they at least avoided that. And now people are not talking about the depth chart deficiency so much as, okay, how can this all fit together now?
Yeah, so you didn't join Bruntz and I when we discussed the Ochaun Mathis edition on Saturday. What are your general thoughts on what that means for Nebraska with that defensive line, with that defense as a whole? We'll stick with on the field, and then we'll get your thoughts on what that NIL victory basically means off the field.
Well, I mean, I think about their sack total, and I know I've been made fun of for knowing the exact number last year was 1.67.
Who would make fun of such a thing?
I think it was around 1.67 was their sack average from last year. But that's what it was, I'm pretty sure. And Garrett Nelson has said they want to bring that up a whole one notch to 2.67, I guess. And I think Ochaun Mathis, a guy with 13 sacks over the last couple of years, you think, well, maybe he can really help that out. I'm interested of how they all feed off each other, though. Like, I think he's going to be aided by a guy like Garrett Nelson, who I think is coming into his own and going to be a really good player. And I think Garrett Nelson and Caleb Tanner have to be pretty excited about this, where you have another guy that the opposition has to worry about. It creates better matchups on certain plays for guys. And you would just hope that they can get home a little bit more. And I think there's going to be times where you can use all three of those guys, Tanner, Nelson, Mathis, on the field at the same time. So I was sort of struck when you paid attention to the interviews his mom and him have done, and also what she was saying on social media beforehand of Nebraska really won this recruitment too in connecting. I know the NIL is a big part of it, but they connected better than Texas. They made it feel like more of a family and a better culture than Ochaun thought about what he saw in Austin. And that's saying something, since he's so familiar with that area, and also, of course, Gary Patterson.
So to get to 2.67, Nebraska would have to have like 31 sacks across 12 games, or 33 sacks across 13 games. Is that basically kind of the number? Are you going to have can we get a whiteboard behind you during the season where you just have the sack total, and then each week we can bring it down slightly, and we can see kind of where they're at.
Do it like election night when they're down to like 2 states and 2 counties are left to tally the votes in.
Here's what I want to see. I want to see like a Willie Mays Hayes thing where every time there's a sack, BC takes a paper sack and tacks it on the wall behind him there until we get to 33.
I was wondering if you were going to see if he was going to have to seek out Jay Terry so he could get some of those gloves, the Nebraska gloves, and stack those behind him. He's got an empty wall right behind him. So, I mean, we can utilize this to Husker247 podcast advantage as long as BC is okay with it.
Just 3 months of paper grocery sacks on the wall behind you.
Yeah, I'm not against some sort of chain. If we figure out the exact number to get to an average of 2.67 sacks.
I don't know why. The whole thing reminds me of if you go to a gas station and they have some kind of promotion going on and you can like color a shamrock or a shoe and then you can hang it up somewhere in the gas station. Like that's what this would remind me of. People could submit their paper sacks to send to BC. They could be proudly displayed on the wall. I think we have something here.
Yeah. That'll separate us from the crowd. We can do that.
We'll put the Husker 24/7 office address on the scroll right there, and you can send us your decorated paper sacks. Get ready for the season.
Oh man! All right. I mentioned this, and you talked about how Nebraska connected, and it wasn't just NIL, but there is little doubt in my mind that this victory and Nebraska's attachment to NIL is a big win in being able to entice or to promote kind of what they can do with future recruits, whether that's the high school kids, whether that's transfer portal guys. Brian, just from the NIL side of things, what kind of impact do you think Ochaun Mathis and landing him could have for Nebraska in terms of going out and trying to pitch other prospective student athletes?
Well, they've stacked victories in this department now because I think when Casey Thompson sort of went public with the interviews about, Nebraska would actually, he said, was better than Texas by quite a bit with the NIL stuff and just the opportunities here. Of course, people might remember Ochaun Mathis didn't tweet a lot during it, but he had the old eyeballs emoji out when that was happening.
The side eyes.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a ripple effect where there's other guys who are seeing that, and Nebraska sort of becomes one of those schools where it's known like they've got a good setup behind the scenes there, and it's kind of a confusing thing to talk about because it's not directly linked. We got to sometimes make this clear to Nebraska athletics, but it's a Nebraska-based collectives where this is coming from. And Nebraska's well-positioned right now, I think, I'm not saying they're the best in the country by any means, but the collectives around here are among the best in the Big Ten and probably, I would guess, in the top 10 in the country. I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it feels like they've got it pretty well put together. Now, where this is all headed is going to be pretty interesting because now there's talk about they want to crack down on certain things. So we don't even know what it's going to look like a year from now. But I give Nebraska credit for whatever the situation is, whether you like it or not, what the setup of the college sports landscape is right now. You have to do your best within the framework of what it is, or if there are even frames, I don't know, around what we're doing right now. But I feel like that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think you summed it up really well, and I think the potential for Nebraska to kind of pitch that. And what is interesting to me is that sort of has emerged too with some high school guys where they have kind of made it known like we're involved in this space. I mean, the NIL faction of what Nebraska is doing, not Nebraska's coaches. As you said, you do have to be able to distinguish and separate those two things. Even though the catch-all term of just saying Nebraska and its NIL package is much simpler. But that is going to be an involvement with some of the top recruits that they're after for the high school thing. And then certainly, I mean, Nebraska doesn't look like they're done with the transfer portal. And before we get into Kane Williams, I do want to spend a little more time on Devin Drew. BC, I know you talked with Coach Strohmeyer. Why is this such a good fit in terms of playing a 4-3 versus him being a 3-4, end or nose tackle?
4-3 was what he was familiar with at Iowa Western, and also what he sort of thought. I don't know exactly what Texas. I can't remember how their coaching setup was, but there was a shift in their staff while he was there, or right when he got there, and sort of what I think he thought he was going to be in sort of shifted beneath him, and so that was more of a 3-man front. So I think he thought he was going into something that might resemble more of what he had done at Iowa Western, and I just think his body type and everything fits that scheme better. And also he's excited because he knows that he's needed. There was so much commotion about Nebraska needs an interior guy, so he knows that he's important. But he also doesn't think it's like there's nobody in the room. Like he feels like it's sort of that happy medium between I have to contribute here, I'm important, but I'm also not going to a place where it just stinks. Like there's guys who can play, and I think it can work together. And he's a determined guy. He was 7th on the depth chart at his position at Iowa Western as a walk-on when he got there. Had played Mike linebacker in high school, was 235 pounds.
Yeah, he's like
that.
6'2". He grew into being a defensive lineman.
And Scott Strohmeyer, who's very respected around here, just said every day my coaches on that side just kept saying, we got to move him up a notch every day. And before you knew it, he was their top guy, like a few weeks into the season. Then he was the best player in the region by his second year there and off to Texas Tech. So he's now a guy who's used as an example at Iowa Western of what can happen if you put it together. And he's durable. And you've said it before. I think you said it last week, Schaefer. The word we sometimes don't talk about enough, and anything can happen at football. A guy can get hurt tomorrow, but availability is, the biggest thing. And with, that's been a knock on some guys that have left the program. And Devin Drew, at least to this point, that's been something he's been really good at in all the stops he's been, is being durable.
Yeah, absolutely. Brunts, when we throw Devin Drew into that kind of interior defensive line mix, it feels like you got a pretty strong first 3 in Ty Robinson, Devin Drew, and Nash Hutmacher. Where would you lean for that 4th person in that interior defensive line mix? Because I think you could give me one of like 3 different names, and I don't know that I would be totally surprised by it, because I think that there's a pretty severe drop after Nash Hutmacher, if I may say so.
Yeah, well, there's definitely tiers, and the table kind of slides off pretty quickly after that top group, because we don't have anything to go off of. When you start talking about guys like Ruquan Buckley or Jalen Weaver, guys that are a little bit farther down the depth chart, that's the unknown. And I kind of said in the opening, I think that it's becoming less of a concern for me, but it's still a concern right now. I think you're going to need probably another guy in that group, whether it's somebody that can play a straight up nose or somebody that's a little bit more of a 4-3 type player. But Nebraska's still kicking the tires on guys. They've got visits set up with Lamar Goods on the 12th. I think you'll see some other names be linked to Nebraska pretty quickly here. But I think they do need another body in there to be kind of a rotational guy, because the Big Ten is a very rugged league. You've got guys that are, even though Devin Drew's played a lot of football, he hasn't played in the Big Ten yet. It's a little bit different animal than the Big 12. And you're going to, I think, need another body in there that can give you snaps and also help you against the run, because that's just the biggest concern that I have right now is how do you stand up and, go toe-to-toe with the Minnesotas, Iowas, and Wisconsins late in the year. You need some bodies there. So I think they've done a good job to start to address those things, but I still think there's work to do over the next month or so here to get that kind of ironed out a little bit.
And if you had to give one name
that's in that tier,
that would be who you think the 4th guy would be. Like if you're in a 2 deep and you got Devin Drew and Ty Robinson are line 1, Nash Hutmacher and X is line 2. Who's X?
Probably
we're doing algebra.
I'm blanking on his name, but the walk-on from UTAN.
Colton Feast.
That's who I think it is as well.
I would put him in there right now. Another guy that hasn't really had to go through the Big Ten, so we'll see, how that plays out. But they've liked him
as a practice player. He's also been hurt a fair amount too. So
yeah, I mean that's kind of the MO on everybody in that group. It feels like. They like him. Right. He's kind of been hurt, or there's something that hasn't quite clicked there to where they've gotten in the mix.
Right. BT, you're going to say something.
Well, you guys didn't get the sense coming out of spring. I'll ask the question. Beyond the guys we've talked about, did you get the sense from Newsome, Buckley, Weaver, Marquise Black, any of those guys that they were that close? Was your feeling leaving the spring that it was on the cusp of something or not?
I think Weaver's a year away. I don't know what Marquise Black is. Buckley's maybe the most interesting. Newsome, I kept waiting to see if he would pop up in the transfer portal. I mean, Newsome spoke to the media. I don't know if that means anything. He's a guy that this should be his time. If there's playing time there and he can be the number 2 guy behind one of those top guys, that's a better spot than he's been in the last few years. So maybe he can take that and run with it. But yeah, I think there's a reason that Colton was out there in the spring game. There's a reason that he's been talked about a little bit. They've liked him behind the scenes for a while. As a practice guy, as a practice squad kind of guy, or scout team, I should say. Whether he's ready to be your number 2 defensive tackle behind one of those guys, I don't know, but that's kind of where they're at the moment.
I do wonder, though, if more 4-man fronts allows somebody like a Mosai Newsome to be more impactful than maybe in a 3-4. Because he was always a tweener, and he had to put on the weight. And I think that might be an opportunity for a guy like him to be more impactful than maybe, if you were just playing 3-4 all the time.
The cruel sort of part of all of this is the guy that I most want to see in that position in the 4-3 in that interior line. Spent 4 years at Nebraska, basically being, it might have been 5 years at Nebraska, being pushed into a 3-4 role that never fit him, that he was never recruited for, and that's DeAndre Thomas. I would have loved to have seen DeAndre Thomas as a defensive tackle in this defense because that was the role that he was recruited by John Perella for. I mean, he's one of those guys that I feel like got screwed the most out of the 3-4 defensive transition, and he just never really found a home because he's a tweener himself. I think there's some similarity with him and Devin Drew in terms of size and just based on what I've read, kind of attitude and all of that. So I really do wish we could have seen DeAndre Thomas in this defense in a 4-3.
And DeAndre had his moments last year. I mean, if Devin is that sort of guy plus just a little something extra and you add one other piece, you could get by with that. I mean, I think of DeAndre even at Michigan State, he got a penalty on the play, a bad penalty, but it was a sign of what he could do on a given play, and he had a few of those. So hopefully that's what they're getting, and then just like I say, a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. The NFL draft took place over the weekend. Nebraska had three players selected. This group, featuring Michael Brentz, Brian Christopherson, Mike Schaefer, we're all confident, 100% confident that 3 players would get drafted. We were right on the number, at least in the confidence. We didn't necessarily have the right 3. Cam Jurgens went in round 2. Cam Taylor-Britt went in round 2, which I regard as a pretty sizable surprise. I just didn't think he was going to go that early. And then nothing for seemingly forever until Samori Toure comes off the board to join Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. All right, what level of surprise do you guys have that JoJo Domann was not selected? I mean, we talked about his versatility. We talked about how he'd fit in terms of teams looking for guys that can play special teams. He was highly productive last year. I mean, his last game was against Ohio State, and it might have been one of the best games that he played all year in terms of film, and he was doing it with a hand injury. I'm a little surprised that no one thought in the age of 250 some selections that you wouldn't use one of those on JoJo Doman. I find that somewhat curious. Am I alone in this, or were you guys a little taken back by that? Brunts?
I mean, he was the best available player for a long time.
It was like 2 rounds.
Yeah, and I was surprised. I figured, we've seen, I think, in some situations with Nebraska players where it gets to kind of be, they don't get picked as early as maybe you think. You start getting into the maybe 6th round or something like that, and that felt like, okay, JoJo's going to get picked here, and he didn't. And I don't know if that was if there was a medicals thing. You kind of, your head goes there with his injury history. Later in the draft, you kind of start looking for guys that have maybe untapped athleticism, upside type guys. I kind of wonder if maybe he, teams felt he didn't have that. I don't know. There's any number of reasons you kind of wonder. But I was very surprised that he wasn't picked. I think the thing you can say about JoJo is he's going to use that to kind of drive him with Indianapolis or wherever he ends up. And he's not going to forget that. And he's going to turn it into a positive, I think. But that was the surprise for me. I was disappointed to not see Austin Allen go to the Broncos at pick 232. They went tight end earlier in the draft. And that really kind of, threw some cold water on that ironclad prediction with Austin Allen. But JoJo was the shocker for me. He didn't get picked. I was expecting, maybe even really early on day 3, let alone not get picked. That was a big surprise.
So that would be, I'm trying to think. Nebraska had several guys in recent years attend the combine and not get drafted. Like Stanley Morgan went to the combine, right? And he didn't get drafted. JoJo Doman and Austin Allen went to the combine. They didn't get drafted. I feel like there was somebody last year that fell into that category.
Was Lamar Jackson? Did he go to the combine?
Yep. That's another one. Because he and Stanley were the same. Or maybe one of those two didn't get invited, and that was a big deal in itself, too. I don't really remember. But
the surprising thing about JoJo too, I mean, he was a Senior Bowl guy, and I saw the stats they put out on that, and I think it was 83% of the guys that were at the Senior Bowl got picked. I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 thing that if you get selected for that, you're going to get drafted, but it is kind of rare that occurs.
I think your general sort of thought on the medicals probably holds a lot of the weight here. I mean, it couldn't have been a production issue. I doubt it would have been an interview issue. But that did surprise me. Jay Foreman talks about this every so often, but he basically feels pretty strongly if you're not taken in the first 4 or 5 rounds, you should be rooting to be able to be an undrafted free agent, because you can kind of go through depth charts and find the best situations for yourself. I would be really curious, because one of the things I've never really done, it would be talk to one of those guys and see just how many offers they had and how you go through that process. Or if you're so kind of crestfallen about not being taken that you kind of jump on that first phone call when you get it.
I mentioned this on our board too. I'm curious how many, maybe someone's put this out there. I'm not going to comb through it, but how many super seniors from this last year got drafted? Because you're thinking about, in most cases, they're not JoJo Doman type players. They're guys who they just, if they had the goods to play in the NFL, it would have happened the year before that. And JoJo, as Bruns mentioned with the medicals, he's also about 25, and so that's probably the combination there. That is a frustrating part to me, though, of the league sometimes. And I get it that they're looking for it's a different level of play, and some guys are tweeners. And so you're trying to see how they actually fit at that level. But sometimes you'll see a guy who you're like, this guy every week in college football when I watched it was a great player. And I saw this with JoJo. There was Ohio State writers who were like, what, what's up with JoJo Doman, because they remember that game and how good he was
great.
He was the best player on the field against, except for the Ohio State receiver who had 500 yards maybe.
Also their kicker who went 5 for 5
Yeah.
or whatever it was.
Yeah. So yeah, I was shocked like you guys with that one. I thought he'd be like a 5th or 6th rounder, but it was a weird draft because I've been trained to sort of think that guys that from Nebraska that might get drafted are going to go around later than I think they might at this point, the way it's been, because Nebraska doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. And early on in the draft, it was the opposite, actually, where you get the Cams in the 2nd round, and it's sort of this vibe like, okay, everything's going to kind of fall Nebraska's way. And you're thinking they're going to have 5 guys picked or something like this, the way it's going. And then Saturday, fortunately, there was the Ochaun Mathis and his dog Yoda doing their thing at 3:00 to sort of distract from the silence.
Is Ochaun Mathis a ventriloquist? Do we know this? Like he's got that puppet thing, right?
He tweeted a picture of a puppet with the Nebraska hat on. I don't. Yeah. That feels like something that needs to be explored further.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll look into that. We'll see if we can answer it. I don't know how easy this is to answer. Who would you be looking for in the 2023 draft that could potentially represent Nebraska?
Ochaun Mathis.
Okay.
I mean,
and his dog.
Yeah, Yoda and the puppet. I think Travis Vokalek is where I immediately go, and beyond that, I mean, I don't. Is there a slam dunk guy right now?
Maybe I'm just an idiot, but it's hard for me to fathom that Travis Vokalek would get drafted and Austin Allen would not, unless the tight end class is just significantly different, or if it's just because Vokalek is regarded to be such a superior blocker. Those are the only things I can think of in that regard.
I think from talking to people around the program that there was a ton of intrigue from scouts coming in this year about Vokalek, in part because he's that type of guy that I mentioned where there's a lot that hasn't been tapped there in terms of his ability as a pass catcher, I think. And I think, too, that Nebraska is going to feature him a lot in this offense, more so probably than what we saw with Austin Allen. And so I think that's why there's going to be a little bit of momentum behind his name this time next year. I just, not only because of the physical traits, like you mentioned, the blocking and stuff like that. I mean, he's got a huge wingspan,
his catch radius,
offensive tackle type wingspan. And so I think there's going to be a lot of reasons why scouts are going to be pretty intrigued by him.
All right. So Michael Bruns suggests buying all of the available stock that's out there on Travis Vokalek.
Just get it while you can right now.
He did. Bruns just switches from tight end to tight end.
I know. I've moved. This is also me moving on.
He's got no loyalty.
I'm protecting myself.
BC, besides Ochaun Mathis and Travis Vokalek, who else are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, it kind of looks like a thin draft
class
when you look through the depth chart, because in a lot of cases you're hoping everybody is back for a couple more years, which is good for Nebraska football. It might be sort of a lean draft, but if some of these guys like your Luke Reimer types and Nick Henrich are really good, but they're still in the program another year. Garrett Nelson doesn't seem like a guy who would, move on to after this season. He's got a couple years left. Quentin Newsome is 2 years down the road. So a lot of the guys that pop into my head as possible NFL guys at some point, they're a couple years from, I think, declaring. And so that's a good thing. So I would say Mathis and I would say Vokalek is intriguing. Maybe a guy like Devin Drew, if he really pops at Nebraska, could be I'm sure he's coming here with the mindset of I can put on film that I can do this in the Big Ten and be one of those guys. And that's actually one thing where we can connect how we started with how we're ending here is I do think there is an appeal you can make to linemen in the portal of you want to really see what you're made of. And if you put it on film, do it in the Big Ten or the SEC. As opposed to the Big 12. I think the draft, I know there's more teams in the Big 10 right now, but I think it was 48-25 in draft picks between the Big 10 and Big 12. And I'm sure at some point that talk about the lines and how they're different in the leagues was mentioned to both those guys.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, if it wasn't. Someone's not doing a good enough job in terms of recruiting. This is a real wild card because we still haven't seen him play for Nebraska yet. But if Casey Thompson has a big year coming off of Kenny Pickett's success, I do wonder, one, he's an older guy. If he has a big year, I don't think he's coming back. Two, if Kenny Pickett was taken as a first, was he a first round or a second round guy? I can't even remember.
First round.
He was the Steelers' first round pick, right? Yeah. So, I mean, you've got a little bit of a history, and the NFL loves to, if the next quarterback guru in college is somehow Mark Whipple, and it wouldn't be a surprise if a coach was like, okay, I want to get in on this. If Casey Thompson has a big year, he goes to the draft and he puts up decent combine numbers. So I don't know that I believe that that's what's going to happen, but I think that there's at least a small chance that could play out that way.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the quarterback class next year expected to be a little bit deeper than what we saw this year?
I don't know that it's expected to be deeper. It's expected to have more high-end guys. So part of it for this year was that guys like Malik Willis and others were being elevated into the first round, when in other years they probably don't have that kind of clout. Next year you'd be talking about CJ Stroud for sure. Help me out here. Who else would be part of that group? He's the first name that comes to mind.
Let's see.
Then, I mean, you'd have your Jackson Darts and your
the kid at Miami, right?
Yeah. And then I don't know if Bryce Young. Forget about Bryce Young. So I think the top end of the board is really high. And Casey Thompson is not going to work his way into that, barring some sort of 52 touchdown season.
That's what you're predicting?
No, I'm not. But it wouldn't shock me if in a copycat league like the NFL is, if he were to go have a 40 touchdown season at Nebraska, which I don't think is that.
Are you
insane.
You're predicting 40, not 52?
I feel better about 40 over 52.
Okay.
I mean, the guy threw 28 touchdowns last year of a busted thumb for 7 weeks.
He did.
I mean, and I don't think this is going to shock anybody. I think Nebraska's going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. So I think he has a chance to put up some pretty big numbers. And if he does, I don't think he's coming back for 2023.
I want you to do this. Before next week, I want you to write 1 through 40 on the wall behind you. And then we're going to cross off every week to see if he gets to 40.
This is a closet. It's not a wall.
It's all right. You got room there.
We'll see. I gotta check with the real owner of the house.
Yeah. I would do that first.
So, anything we want to get on the record here before we end this tremendous podcast content?
I think you ended it in a great way there. I like that.
Ending it by saying I feel better about 40 touchdowns than I do 52.
Yes.
Okay. I am going to, next week, hold me to this. I will have the approximate number of touchdowns that I expect Casey Thompson to throw, if healthy, and I feel like that's a key caveat here. Or let's say that he makes a minimum of 11 starts.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
And I will show up with a number, and you guys can hold me to that and ridicule me if it's not even close.
Are you going to tell us, or are you just going to write it on a piece of paper and slide it across the table?
I don't know that works on Zoom. You want me to put it in the private chat section over here?
Yeah.
All right. No, I'll say it out loud. I'll take I'm not afraid to be wrong.
Okay.
Clearly. I feel like I've made a little bit of a brand out of it. So why stop now?
Lean into it.
Yeah. So that's the teaser for next week. You can find out how many touchdowns Casey Thompson's going to throw. You heard it here first. Nothing else, you guys?
I don't have.
No, I think that's great.
Okay. We have anything else we need to hit on?
No. I mean, hoops was interesting, I guess, with the the possibility of Shireman putting Nebraska in the top 5, but then picking Creighton. But we can get to hoops at another time as we kind of, I think in the next week or two, for sure, it'll be sort of hammered to the wall. Like, this is the roster, and so that we can have a full discussion then.
Hammered to the wall, like the sacks that are going to be hammered.
Yeah, they'll both be up there. We'll have the roster chart.
Very, very interesting imagery from our podcast today, for sure.
Yeah.
So, Brunts, you have 20 seconds you want to spend on Nebraska baseball after they went 1-2 against Iowa over the weekend?
Played well against Iowa, finished 1-2. They're in basically a 6-man death match right now for 3 spots to make the Big Ten tournament. They're at last place Minnesota this weekend. Got a sweep. That's your Nebraska baseball 20 seconds.
They basically need to win like 6 of their remaining 9 conference games, right?
6-3, you'd feel pretty good about, I think, your chances of making the tourney.
Okay. All right. There's your Nebraska baseball update. I have nothing else to add. Plenty of stuff going up on Husker247, though. Obviously, lots of coverage. Official visits are getting locked in, including guys like Ashley Williams and Riley Van Poppel, among those that have officially locked in when they're coming out to Nebraska in June. Kane Williams is visiting. Lamar Good's expected to visit as well here in May, so we can touch on those next week. But, of course, all that content can be found at Husker247, along with everything else that you can get there. I'm Mike Schaefer for Brian Christopherson. Michael Brunts, we will catch you next time.